The world's 1.4 billion Catholics have a new pope, and he's an American, Cardinal Robert Prevost from Chicago, Illinois, who has just been elected the 267th occupant of the throne of St. Peter. Now, for American Catholics, this is a great honor. He's the first American in history to hold the office. But while I am generally not a fan of mixing church and state, this is one of those cases where I think it is unavoidable. Now, theologically speaking, the early word is that Prevost is something of a centrist. It is believed that he will try and right the ship a bit from some of the excesses of his predecessor, Pope Francis. And there is a clue to this in his name, Pope Leo XIV, coming on after Leo XIII, who, without getting in too deeply into it, reigned from 1878 to 1903 and himself was very concerned with reconciling the church to modernity. He was against socialism, but also the excesses of laissez-faire capitalism. Sounds good. But, and there's always a but, politically, ideologically, the new Pope Leo is still understood to be reasonably liberal and quite close to Pope Francis. And he also spent a substantial amount of time in Latin America living in Peru. And, God forgive me for saying this, but, well, there's always a tweet. As Cardinal, the new Pope seemed to attack Vice President J.D. Vance on immigration. He retweeted hard-left pro-open borders theologians who attacked Donald Trump for using the phrase bad hombres. And there were others where he called for prayers for George Floyd, which again is fine because Jesus dined with criminals, but I couldn't find any prayers for the victims of the BLM riots either. Now, again, I think the news of an American pope is great. As a Catholic myself, I celebrate it. And I do not think that simply combing through the new Holy Father's social media history is any way to judge him, particularly when he's been in the chair really only for a matter of hours. But the worry here is that the new pope, whatever his theology, will also be a political player, and that he may have been selected with a bit of what has been called the Trump effect in mind. And to that, it's interesting to note what Steve Bannon had to say a week ago on this very subject.
I do think one of the dark horses, and I think, unfortunately, he's one of the most progressive, is Cardinal Prevost. I don't think he's getting enough play. He is certainly on the short list as being, and I think it's pretty shocking given how the contempt they hold the American church. The American church gives so much money, they're afraid it has too much power. So they've never really wanted to have an American pope. But my understanding is Prevost is one of the ones closest to Francis ideologically. He's also had tremendous experience in Latin America. And so he's one of the ones on the short list.
So, pretty interesting. Now, again, I wish the new pope well, and for Catholics, this should be a time of prayerful thanksgiving. But when it comes to the politics, well, we'll see. But I think it's wrong to write the American pope off as a wild-eyed radical just yet. Now, on to other matters. Joe Biden. Remember that guy? He's emerged from seclusion. So where do you think the former president has gone to make a big return to the stage? Richard Nixon, of course, famously sat down with David Frost to begin his long comeback after Watergate. But there's been nothing so high-minded for Biden. No, instead, he's sat down with the ladies from The View and brought along his wife Jill as, I guess you could only say, as his carer. And I tell you what, he's looking fitter than ever, or as MSNBC's Joe Scarborough might put it, this version of Biden is the best there's ever been.
The projects, the benefits. How do you lead the world without having the best infrastructure in the world? How do you lead the world without having the best health care in the world? How do you lead the world without having the best education system in the world? How do you lead the world when you don't have that done?
Howdy. Even the View ladies, though, they couldn't avoid the big question, which is, of course, was Joe Biden really with it, particularly in that last troubled year of his presidency?
Since you left office, there have been a number of books that have come out, deeply sourced from Democratic sources, that claim in your final year there was a dramatic decline in your cognitive abilities in the final year of your presidency. What is your response to these allegations, or are these sources wrong?
So I know you're asking, was Joe Biden able to answer the question? You be the judge.
They are wrong. There's nothing to sustain that, number one. Number two, you know, think of what we're left with. We're left with a circumstance where we had an insurrection when I started, not since the Civil War. We had a circumstance where we were in a position that the pandemic, because of the incompetence of the last outfit, end up over 1 million people dying, 1 million people dying. And we're also in a situation where we found ourselves unable to deal with a lot of just basic issues, and which I won't go into in the interest of time.
Yeah, that's not really answering the question there, is it, Mr. President? Eventually, former First Lady Jill had to step in to play cleanup.
You know, one of the things that
and Alyssa, you know, one of the things I think is that the people who wrote those books were not in the White House with us, and they didn't see how hard Joe worked every single day.
Yeah, sorry, this is all cope. You saw it, I saw it, we knew, everybody knew that Joe Biden was in decline, and we knew we were being gaslit. And we also know that the cover-up was being driven by staffers with direct knowledge of what was really going on, but who hid it from the American people and the world. I mean, again, we all saw it.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. We're going to beat President Putin. As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian.
Also, China's selling dual-use tech to Ukraine. We just slapped a bunch of sanctions on them. The Russian Navy's doing port calls in Cuba, 90 miles off the Florida coast.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping, traveling with him. I guess we traveled 17,000 miles when I was vice president. I don't know that for a fact.
Look, I could run those all night, but I won't. This rehabilitation, though, that they're attempting on Joe Biden, I think is too little too late, and it comes against a tide of books which are absolutely damning about the way the White House and much of the media, to their ever-loving shame, covered up what was going on in the White House. Meanwhile, the current president, Donald Trump, well, there aren't so many concerns about him. He's still got it. Just a few hours ago, he was talking about former Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who some people talk about as a presidential contender.
When they took over, Buttigieg, who has no clue, you know, he drives to work on his bicycle with his, in all fairness, with his husband on the back, which is a nice, loving relationship. But he didn't have a clue. This guy didn't have a clue. And he's actually a contender for president. Between him and Crockett, you can have that party. But he didn't know what he was doing.
Funniest president ever, totally underrated. But Trump may also, I am told, put the final nail in the coffin of the decline denialists, with the word being that he is going to release the audio tape of Joe Biden's interview with special counsel Robert Hur. Remember that? That was the one where the prosecutors said they couldn't bring charges against Biden for mishandling classified documents because they thought he would appear as a declining old man.